everyone. Welcome to my channel. Today I want to talk about my top three favorite wacky, weird, rare 45s that I have in my collection. These are not like the most expensive, valuable ones. Well, one of them is. They're just the ones that are my favorite and have weird stories behind them. A little background on how I got into record collecting. I guess I'd have to go back to when I was a kid. One of the ways that I would escape the perils of my lonely childhood was to come home from school and listen to my dad's records for hours. So fast forward to the mid-2000s, I was going to Cal State Long Beach and living in a studio apartment there. I had a small record collection, and there was a record store up the street on 7th Street called Dizzy on Vinyl. It is still there. If you live in Southern California, go in and say what's up to Dizzy for me. This place was not just a record store, it was like a local hang. There was just this ragtag group of weirdos that would come in and out of the store and hang out there for hours on end. I was one of those weirdos. So I was already into like punk and post-punk and new wave and rockabilly and stuff like that, and obviously rock and roll. But Dizzy opened my eyes to a whole new genre of music through a CD compilation called Nuggets, which was a collection of underground 60s music, garage rock, proto-punk, early psychedelic music, and kind of hits that never made it to the mainstream, because I was always super into classic rock and music from the 60s, but it was like, oh my god, there's this whole other layer that I didn't even know about, and the music was so great. I found out that there were a lot of bands that were emulating this style, this 60s proto-punk style, that were playing around LA. So I would go to these shows and they'd have DJs there that were spinning, original 45s. I wanted to be one of those DJs, and I did end up becoming one of those DJs. It wasn't enough to spin just an LP, because anybody can get an LP reissue. There's tons of compilations that have all these cool, rare songs on them. But the real work came in procuring the original 45s of these rare, obscure songs. And you can imagine that it's hard to find these tunes because they weren't even hits when they came out. So it involved a lot of research and a lot of commitment, which I had. I was just totally obsessed. And so, you can see I got like boxes of stuff. I love these old vintage 45 boxes. This was my DJ rig, which is just, chock full. So without further ado, let's get into it and talk about my top 3 favorite 45s that I own. All right, so this first one is called Flying Saucers Have Landed. You can see it's in the original Pi Records sleeve. The last time this record was sold was in 2022. I found it on eBay for $550. I got it for 12 bucks off of a website that does not exist anymore called Gem. I saw it on there. I knew what it was. The guy who was selling it had no idea what it was, obviously, and I got it for 12 bucks. So out of the 3 songs I'm talking about today, this is the only one that's gonna cause my video to be demonetized. But I really don't care, because it's just way too interesting to not talk about. The guy who wrote it and recorded it under the name Paul St. John, but that was not his real name. The artist's name is Lawrence Marshall, known as Laurice. Laurice was one of the first openly gay recording artists, with songs like He's My Guy and the S&M themed song Born to Serve. And my personal favorite that he did, other than this one, was recorded in 1973 under a band name called The Grudge, and it's called I'm Gonna Smash Your Face In. So he actually was working at Abbey Road Studios during this time, writing songs for other artists. I guess he was a talent scout, and he was writing songs for Alan Parsons. Let's take a little listen to this super groovy song called Flying Saucers Have Landed from 1972.
Cast your mind back 10,000 years, the world was dark and cold. They came from out of the skies, they came from out of the clouds. The people looked up and they saw them there, the strangers from beyond. They spoke with voices deep and strong, like thunder, loud and long. Flying saucers have landed, flying saucers have landed, flying saucers have landed, all over the world. Flying saucers have landed.
example of early glam rock. So Larissa's still around and he's still doing interviews, which I think is awesome. I would love to interview him for my channel. And I wanted to read to you the intro that he has written on his website. Curious to learn more about that magical period of glamour and outrageousness when sex, drugs, and disco music were at their exhilarating height? Let Loris, Canada's prior reigning #1 dance vocalist, show you. Canada's prior reigning #1 dance vocalist. That's quite a title. We could probably come up with something better, but it's pretty good. All right, so next up we have this gem from 1974 called Boogie Till My Brains Fall Out by Mondo. And it was written by Dick Mondo, who was also known as Daddy Dewdrop, and he had a hit in 1971 with a song called Chickaboom, Don't You Just Love It, which was written for the Saturday morning cartoon Groovy Ghoulies. Now this actually ended up taking me down a rabbit hole. So as you can see by the label, it was released by Buddha Records. I started looking into it and man, I had no idea how heavily the mob was involved in the music industry and the record industry in the 50s, 60s, 70s, all the way up through the 80s. Buddha Records was started in 1967 by the former head of Kama Sutra Records named Art Cass. Art started Buddha Records after being dissatisfied with whatever was going on at Kama Sutra with a few different partners, including Johnny Sonny Francesi, who was the underboss of the Colombo crime family and used the record label to launder illegal mob earnings and to bribe DJs with payola. So I think I'm gonna do a separate video on how the mob infiltrated the record industry back in the day because it was really interesting. And there's stories of record company executives being unalived. And I had no idea how dark it actually was. So anyway, here's this song, Boogie Till My Brains Fall Out. I just love the title, and I just love the song. I don't know, I just do.
Mama's gone, so seems wrong. Work is famous, do won't know nothing.
Okay, I didn't say it was good, guys. I just said I liked it.
Mama tried,
I picture like a big hippie slapping his bare feet on the floor with like a can of Schlitz.
I tried, oh I tried. She's a wondering why. She keeps a wondering why. I'm gonna boogie till my brains fall out.
That's a lot of boogie.
Boogie till my brains fall
You gotta
out.
boogie pretty hard for your brains to fall out.
Take my penny, do your dandy, and boogie till my brains fall out.
All right, you guys get the point. So yeah, this song includes such deep, profound lyrics as "Don't you do this, and don't you do that, and don't you eat last night's tacos early in the morning. You could die." That's valuable advice, guys. You should definitely heed that warning. All right, so last but certainly not least, we have this. This is a single called 7-Eleven by a band called the Chumps. So a little bit about the Chumps. This single 7-Eleven came from an album that was recorded in 1979 called The Problem with Saxophones. They're a band from Washington, D.C. They came out of the first wave of D.C. punk rock and were Washington, D.C.'s first no-wave band. I had never heard of no wave. I had heard of new wave, but I hadn't heard of no wave, so I kind of had to look it up and see what it was. And it really fits the description of this music perfectly. No Wave was an abrasive avant-garde music and art scene that emerged in downtown New York City in the late 1970s. Coined as an ironic jab at commercial new wave, the movement rejected traditional rock structures in favor of sheer dissonance, atonality, and noise, pulling heavily from free jazz, funk, and disco. And this is like basically, you know, it's like punk rock with sax, which is interesting, and it's kind of all over the place. Now there's a really cool story behind how I got this record. I think I first heard this song on a podcast from the Garage Punk Hideout. I would mention the name of the podcast, but I don't think I can say it on YouTube. So I'll link it in the description box. Anyway, I first heard this song on a podcast and I just loved it. And I remember this was back in the days of MySpace, and I found the band, the Chumps, on MySpace and started chatting with the guy who was running the page, who turned out to be the lead vocalist, Robert Kennedy. And he was super cool. And I told him how much I loved the song. And he's like, you know what? I still have copies of the 45. Let me send you one. So he sent me one. And it's one of my prized possessions. So let's take a listen to 7-Eleven by the Chumps.
It's so fine, all these spots to choose from. At the 7-Eleven, I'm lit out when it takes an acid. Gotta come in every town. Buy some beautiful fucks up. I need watching traffic as the sun goes down. Even quick gigs sucking on the slipping. Read about your favorite movie stars. Eat a half a dozen candy bars. Little soul that's a breakfast gym. Is it open at 3 a.m.?
So it has a really cool outro. It gets super wild and unhinged at the end. And I'll link the full version of the song in the description box. So that's it. Those are my top 3 favorites. It was kind of a hard choice because I have so many 45s and so many cool ones. If this is something you guys think is interesting, let me know. And I'll do another video like this. I can do, 10 more videos like this because I've got the material. So thanks for joining me on this little musical journey. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.